Hi, I'm Debbie Travis.
And I'm Tommy Smythe.
And this is Trust Me, I'm a Decorator. Hi, Tommy. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Debbie?
I'm okay. I'm a little frustrated.
Uh-oh.
I am getting about 50 messages a day from people asking me to hold weddings at my property in Italy.
And I know, because I know you, that you are very reticent to do so.
No, reticent isn't the right word. I will never, ever hold a wedding again because I've done both my kids and I've still got the scars.
It's very stressful.
But whether you're a mother working with your kid on their wedding, or you're getting married yourself, or you're an older person getting married, this is wedding season.
Yes.
Or you're going to a wedding. Actually, I'm starting to go to more because when you're young, you go to a lot because all your friends are getting married. And then as you get older and having kids and things like that, you know, all your friends aren't getting married. They're getting divorced. And then your kids are all getting married. And, you know, we're very friendly with our kids and our kids' friends. So we're getting invited, thankfully, to a lot of their weddings. But, you know, I started to kind of, you know, it's like, what is going on? What is going on with all these people requesting it? And I just very quickly write back, sorry, no. But then you start looking into the drama of weddings. And I've been to quite a few already this summer.
Yeah, you have.
There's the kind of the protocol, and then there's the fashion of how weddings are changing. And all I see is money. And I'm like, why don't they just bugger off? Go with your best friend and go somewhere else. You know, I mean, the money they're spending on, you know, and I look at my wedding pictures and I think, I barely know anybody who's in those pictures, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it can be extraordinarily expensive. Doesn't have to be, but it can be. And as a person who is a well-known former host of a wedding venues show on television, show called Where To I Do, which I did for 3 very successful seasons, I can tell you from an inside point of view that weddings are very diverse. They can be almost any price point. You mentioned at the beginning of this chat that we are in wedding season, but traditional wedding season from kind of like April through to September has now expanded to every season is wedding season.
Yeah.
We featured weddings and venues on tops of mountains in the winter with snow falling, and we were in tropical climates on beaches and in places like New Orleans in the summer. It really doesn't matter what time of year it is, people are tying the knot. And especially post-pandemic, for people who have waited, the wedding industry has exploded. It's so funny because when you say like, I will never have a wedding here at Villa Ragnella, I always think to myself, well, she's saying goodbye to a lot of money because people do pay huge money.
I don't care.
Here's the thing that I've told you before, and I'll tell you again because it's timely with this conversation. The best wedding venues are wedding venues that have accommodations on the property. Those are the most desirable.
Yeah, so they can drink more.
Well, the wedding party doesn't want to have to leave and go offsite and then come back again. So if you have a resort or a place that has some accommodations, even just enough for the wedding party itself, you are banking money, honey.
So when you did your show, took you all the way through the process of the wedding? Were you dealing with the bride and groom and then the hysterical mother-in-law? I'm talking about myself.
We did get some insight into that. Where To I Do was actually specifically about wedding venues, which is why I was tapped to be the host, because it capitalized on my knowledge of space planning and spaces and decor. So we would always show a vision for what I thought the wedding could look like in 3 different venues, and then the couple would choose one. And, you know, it was usually sort of the wedding ended up following along the lines of what we suggested was possible to do within that venue. So we did have interactions with couples and families of couples. And, you know, it was a joy to do the show because you're working with people at the happiest moment of their lives. You know, mostly young people who are embarking on an adventure together and starting that journey with a commitment.
Now, tell me, did they all go through, or did any of them have fistfights and say, I'm not marrying you?
They all happened. We didn't have a single cancellation. That's a great question. And it would have been disastrous for our television production. As a TV producer, you know.
Well, it would have been great television, you know.
I mean, if you invest all this money in shooting a show and then the bride or the groom take a runner, you're left with no show. So we didn't have that happen.
A few weeks ago, I went to my great friend Jackie, who's our podcast nutritional therapist, her youngest son got married, who I've known since kind of the day he was born and adore him. And
I saw the pictures. It was so beautiful.
And, you know, the scary thing, including us here, is weather. I mean, you know, I think, you know, a lot of people just say, forget it, we'll do it inside. But you still, even, you know, you're having to get from the ceremony to the drinks outside, you know, and of course, it doesn't really matter in the end. That's what most people say if it rains. But if this wedding of her son had poured with rain, it would have been impossible. And the Saturday after, it was torrential, right in the middle of the fields. You couldn't get a tractor up there. You know, anyway, it was perfect. Yeah. It was absolutely the perfect weather. But what happened was they have a golf course about a 15, 20-minute walk from their property. So last year, when they planned ahead of time, they were telling everybody, you know, book the room there as fast as you can. Well, of course, I was late. And then a friend called me in January or February and said, have you booked your room? I said, oh, no, I'll do it later. She said, Debbie, there's no rooms left. You've got to book it. Yeah. I said, you're kidding. Because I didn't want to have to get taxis and, you know, drunk and all that kind of stuff. So I call this big resort, you know, not a very posh one, just like this huge one, but they had a lot of rooms. And but apparently there was another wedding going on in the golf resort.
In the hotel, yeah.
So that's why all the rooms were gone. So some were taken from my friend's son's wedding, and the rest was taken by the wedding that was going to happen there. So I called the receptionist. So I said, look, I've got a bit of a problem, but I need 3 rooms, and I know you're full. And I was all ready for a fight. I was all ready to think, oh, I have to get the B&B down the road. And she said, no, she said, we've got as many rooms as you want. I said, what? She said, well, we've had a cancellation. I said, oh, the other wedding cancelled, she says. I'm sure receptionists aren't supposed to chat like this and gossip. So she says, yeah, she said it was terrible. Oh. I said, what happened? So this is over the phone. So she says, well, you know, the whole dinner was going to be here. And she says they do a food tasting, which most weddings do that. You meet with the chef, you meet with the caterers kind of thing. And and we did it for my kids.
Test the menu.
And they had a fight.
During the tasting.
The couple fought so badly over the food that was going to be served at the wedding, which the mother-in-law, the mother of the bride, had chosen all the dishes. So the two mothers, the mother of the bride and the mother of the groom, had a fist fight. Then the son and daughter, the bride and groom-to-be, had a massive fight. And it ended up with, well, I don't want to marry you anyway, you know.
Wow.
So I got my room in the hotel.
In the end, that's a good thing.
Oh, yeah. Thank God they knew now.
Exactly. I mean, marrying somebody you don't know very well is never a good idea.
So we had a situation here where the first wedding was very, very complicated because my children are extremely selfish and all of them decided that they would get married within a pandemic, within 3 months apart, in the heat of the Tuscan summer. And of course, you know, as a wonderful mother, I was like, of course, I'm so honored you're going to do it here. And then I sobbed for a week into the pillow.
I'm just going to interrupt you here and say, as your friend and as a person who was party to the behind the scenes of all of this, you were very excited about these weddings.
Oh, you know what? I'm lucky. I adore my we call them dillies, my daughter-in-law.
You love your daughters-in-law.
They're amazing, amazing women, and they have more class than I do. They're more refined than I am, and I don't handle stress terribly well. You know, I'm a screamer and a shouter and sobbing and stuff.
What do you think you're like as a mother-in-law? Easy or difficult?
They probably won't be listening to this. They would probably say a handful. Because my wedding, we didn't have any money, so my wedding was very, very simple. The first wedding here, the first son's, was simple because we were in lockdown and they could only have like 29 people. Most of them came from the UK. But then the hard part is, you know what they do at weddings? They have these A lists, B lists, and C lists. So, yes. Which I didn't know until a friend of mine's son was getting married in the south of France. And I was on the D list. So, you know, the first lot can't come. And he called me up and he said, oh, we'd love you to come to so-and-so's wedding. It's in Monte Carlo. And I said, oh my God, that's amazing. Yeah, you're on the D list, so you can come now. I said, what does that mean? He says, well, about 50 people couldn't come, so now you can come. I was like, well, what did I get?
I don't think you're supposed to tell people that.
I know. I said, yeah, that's what I said to him.
It is actually a thing that is particular to destination weddings, because with destination weddings, there are always a lot of people who can't manage to get there due to scheduling or financial constraints.
Yeah, and a lot of destination weddings now, because of that, they're having 2 weddings, one at home. So, I mean, oh my God. Anyway, so the first wedding was small. It was under 30 people. They all stayed on the property because they had to quarantine, so they couldn't go out. And nobody comes for a foreign wedding for a day. They come for a week.
For a week.
We had to kind of organize all the food and all that, and that was complicated. And I had dreadful wedding planners. I mean, they were the wedding planners who walk around with a clipboard, very calm, looking perfectly dressed, no sweat. And I'm the mother-in-law who looks like I've been dragged through a bush, screaming and shouting at everybody and having a complete meltdown.
There's a word for that. That's the monster-in-law.
The monster-in-law. Oh, that was me, definitely. But the second wedding was much bigger. It was 2.5 months later. And that was, they could have more people. So they were kind of nearly at 80. But that wedding ended up on the Marilyn Dennis show because we had to make the decision, like all weddings, do you have a marquee or not?
In the wedding business, they call that the backup plan. So there's usually, if it's an alfresco outdoor wedding, there's the ideal plan, and then there's what's the backup plan if weather happens.
Right. But you have to decide, and you still have to pay part of it. So ours wasn't the kind of the marquee with the sides on, which I'm not a big fan of because they're always a bit sweaty. This is one that kind of hooked onto the side of the house, and then these, oh my God, you should have seen the guys, stunning naked men from Florence, pulled and pulled this stretch tent, and it was beautiful. It looked like
suddenly I feel like renting a marquee.
I know. Well, I'll get one when you come. It'll be my birthday present to you.
Thank you.
So that was where people were going to gather. But then we'd already planned the ceremony outside, the aperitivo, which is the cocktails and stuff outside. And then the dinner was for 70 or 80 people, of which I'd had to build land out so they could get this table on. And that had taken months with a pounder, Anyway, and put in new lavender, new grass and all that. And the table, everybody was like virtually ready. I'd even taken my rollers out, and I saw the bride. We had the barn where this room I'm sitting in now was all hairdressers, local hairdressers doing the hair. And I saw the bride running across. Everything was going beautifully. I was still nervous. And this was the middle of September. The sky could not have been bluer. There wasn't a cloud in it. And suddenly I heard this crack. And I thought it was a truck coming down the driveway or something. And I look out and everything went black. So I see waiters with this 7-meter long tablecloth, white tablecloth, below me. There was no rain in the village across. There was no rain to the left, the right. There was nothing right over our house. It was biblical. 2 olive trees were ripped out of the ground. The table was gone. The tablecloths were gone. But the amazing thing was, so I picked up my phone, sobbing, and taped it with dreadful language and just had it hanging out of the window.
I remember.
Yeah, and it ended up on television because I posted it, and then Marilyn said, can we air this? We're doing a show about disastrous weddings. And anyway, so then I see people in bathing suits running across the grass and stuff, including the bride. And she'd said to all the guests, go and put your swimming stuff on. We're going to move tables. I mean, I loved her before. After seeing this, I loved her. So it was like, and I didn't behave with such class, but she was amazing. Her hair was dripping, the makeup was gone. And then, of course, what happened was the meal plan, because, they go through a lot of work to decide who's sitting with who, because, family politics and all that stuff.
Yes. I always tell people, by the way, just to quickly interrupt, put me at the most difficult table. I specialize in this at weddings. I can be at the toughest table with the worst collection of random guests and make it a fun table. That's my specialty.
Well, I wish you'd been here. But anyway, they managed within 15 minutes to move it all inside our living room, which is, huge. And we got nearly 80 people in there. And the rain stopped. And it was gone.
Yeah.
So a lot of towels, mopping stuff up. People were walking down the driveway. Anyway, it was fantastic. And 90% of it was outside. So in the end, they were all thrilled that it worked out like this. But on my wedding day...
Let me say before you wrap up that story, what a sense of adventure that is and of community when everybody just gets together to pivot.
Oh, the kids loved it.
Yeah, just to make something that's not working work as a group. It must have been such a wonderful and fun and exciting adventure.
Well, I think that's often the case with things like that, because that becomes the talking point for the rest of your lives. You tell your grandchildren, oh my God, you should have seen your grandmother.
We're just going to take a quick break. Hold tight. We'll be right back.
I'm Sarah Burke, and I host the Women in Media podcast, where I'm exploring the challenges women face in the media spotlight and celebrating our triumphs. My guests come from radio, TV, news, and sports, and we'll cover topics like leadership, diversity, stereotypes, and more. Most of all, I'm looking to build a community through a space where we can discuss anything. The Women in Media podcast, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or at womeninmedia.ca.
But on my wedding many, many years ago, I had a car crash an hour before I got married.
Oh my gosh, I know this story. You have to tell this story.
Oh,
it's so good.
God. So we hadn't known each other very long, like a few weeks, and I was on a country lane, and I'd been to visit Canada and driven, and of course I'd forgotten I was on the other side, and I had my hair in curlers. I looked like Shirley Temple.
So just to give some backstory, Debbie and Hans decided almost immediately after meeting each other that they were meant for each other. And how many years now have you been together?
36.
36 years. So there you go. Some people, when you know, you know.
Yeah, you know. Well, he told me he was really rich. He wasn't, but anyway, so, you know.
Well, he got there eventually.
Yeah. So I was at my mom's,
hard work.
And we were getting married in what was like a Fawlty Towers type hotel. And I'm coming down this country lane, and the local farmer was coming up in his car, and I hit him. And I had to climb over the wall into the farm kitchen because I knew the way, because I'd had a milk round there when I was 14 or something. And they were all eating their lunch. And I'm like, I'm really sorry, but I think I've killed your husband and I'm getting married in an hour. And blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I didn't kill him. He was perfectly okay. But then all the guests were arriving and the police came, but they were English bobbies on bicycles with a little ding, 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 crash. There's a crash. She's getting married. And there I was in a white jumpsuit, hair in rollers and stuff. Oh, it was chaos. So we didn't have time to take whatever happens when you do a crash, take the notes down.
To take all the information and the insurance information.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
the accident report.
Exactly. And because I'd been a model, there were a lot of models at the wedding. So there were a lot of pretty girls. And so the police, he was just about to start saying, no, love, you're going to have to do this now. Then he saw all these half-naked women and he was like, no, we'll come to a hotel, And so, of course, they all got drunk. So I had like 10 policemen dancing with the models all night and everything. I don't think they ever took the insurance number. But it was a rental car and I wrote it off. So a lot of people worry about, maybe you drop your lipstick on your dress or say, well, I wrote a car off. It was awful.
Hans, obviously, even though you hadn't known each other for very long before you got married, Hans knew what he was getting into. And I also want to add, driving in a car with Debbie Travis is one of the most terrifying experiences you will ever have.
No, it's not.
You are such a chaotic driver. It's a miracle you haven't wrecked 100 cars.
Oh, God. Oh. Well, we just did the classic car rally here, and the guy who owns these priceless, beautiful classic cars actually went to see Hans. And he said, I really don't want Debbie driving as I write off a 1952 Bugatti. But the thing is, it becomes your story.
Of course. It's such a good story. It's one of my favorite stories about you and Hans.
Yeah. And everybody's got that thing, they fall on the cake and, But I think one of the things about weddings is if I was working on a wedding now, I would kind of work the alcohol because The thing about weddings is that you spend a lot of time, maybe you're in the church or the synagogue and, and it's hot and you're waiting and then you have to listen to the speeches and so by the time the booze comes, you're inhaling it. So I think that's why people get very drunk very quickly. And then when that happens, and of course, if you haven't had the speeches, it's a disaster. But, people by the time you're getting ready for the cake and all that kind of stuff, are legless. And so it's I think if I was doing a wedding today, I'd dilute the drinks or say orange juice only until...
I know. And I can tell you a similar story. When one of my sisters, Christy, and my brother-in-law, Christian, got married, they were living in New York City at the time, but most of the people that they would invite to their wedding were living in Toronto. So they actually came and had their wedding up here. And they had it at the top of the TD Center in this beautiful restaurant. And when we did the wedding and we got the bill for the bar, my mother received the invoice from the bar, which is basically all the drinks that everybody had, an itemized list. Like somebody had 16 fuzzy navels, of all things.
16?
Completely open bar. It wasn't just like red, white, or beer. It was a fully open bar. And the restaurant owners told us that we broke the record for a bar bill at a wedding, and we were so proud. But one of the consequences of this was that their MC became so drunk that he couldn't MC the wedding. And so I was the wedding organizer. I planned the wedding with my sister. I had to MC the wedding and step in for him. Which was my first experience with public speaking and where I fell in love with it. Turns out I was actually very good at it and I loved it. And it was the beginning of a later in life great love of public speaking because I found that I was able to do it with confidence, even though it was just I was shoved right into it. But we were so proud of that bar bill. My goodness, it was huge.
You should have framed it for them as
I think I bet you my mom still has it. I think she probably still has it.
So I went to do a story at the new Four Seasons in Thailand, in Phuket, a few years ago. And it was the most beautiful hotel. Oh my God. And it was obviously going to be a well-known wedding venue. I'll never forget it. I wasn't there as a guest or anything, but I was watching them from 5 o'clock in the morning, creating a tunnel of an archway, but long, like maybe 8 arches of beautiful flowers. And they were sewing, They were real flowers. And all these helpers there must have been 100 people sewing this arch of flowers and everything. And
how beautiful.
By 8 o'clock in the morning, this was pretty much up. And then more things were being put on the beach. And I thought, God, this is going to be an amazing wedding. So I go into the breakfast room. And I'd met the manager of the hotel the day before. I saw him hitting his head against the wall. And I'm like, what's he doing? And he was pounding his head, and I can't remember what he was called, Tan or something. I said, Mr. Tan, are you okay? He says, have you seen the weather? Now, it was perfect, just like my son's wedding, absolutely perfect. He said, there's a storm coming and it's going to hit. Gosh. 5 minutes before they walked. He said, have you seen the arches? Which they've insisted on. They flew people over, like wedding planners and everything. Wow. I think they were Japanese. I said, no, you have to be positive. You must be positive. By then he'd kind of had blood coming down his forehead. And we watched it come. And there was not a petal left on the beach. I mean, it was literally lifted up.
Heartbreaking.
In like a hurricane and it was ripped to shreds. And it was very unusual at this time of year to have any type of storm. It was like
heartbreaking.
Yeah, and of course there weren't many places inside because it doesn't rain like that much. But you bless them. I'm sure they're happily married now. But I mean, that's why I guess there's so many television shows about the drama of the lead up.
There are. And when I was approached to do Where to I Do, the wedding venues show, I was very relieved that the proposal for me to be a host of that show didn't involve the drama and, the negative aspects of wedding planning. Because to me, participating in something that is a joyful event in people's lives was not only a privilege, but I considered it a bit of a responsibility to make sure that we told those stories nicely. And I loved doing it. Like I said, you're with people at the happiest times of their lives. And even when there's weather or other factors involved, that create these kinds of dramas, they're usually met with some kind of community effort to mitigate the problem. And I love that about weddings because they're supposed to be a community celebration of the commitment to a relationship of two people. And, they can be all different religions, all different kinds of food. It was such a joy for me to explore the different kinds and types of weddings from different cultures as well.
Did you do an Iranian one?
No, we didn't actually.
Well, they do a sword fight. And I have a great friend who is an Iranian architect, which I'll introduce you to one day. And he married a beautiful girl, and we were invited to the wedding. And he drank a lot. And I could see the mothers getting very worried. First of all, the food is amazing, Iranian food. And it comes on these platter after platter after platter.
Beautiful, theatrical.
But the mothers, I could see the two mother-in-laws going, ooh, ooh, like this. Because then you have to dance around the bride with this huge saber. This sword, and I thought,
dangerous, but also very theatrical.
I know. It was fine, but it was like you could see people ready, like, should we just take it off him?
I love the drama and the theater of those things. Like I love, the hora at a Jewish wedding with the chair up in the air with the couple and I love those celebratory elements of different kinds of weddings from different cultures.
Well, we did that at Max's wedding. He was on a chair.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's my favorite part. Before we wrap up this chat, I want to say the next time we talk about weddings, because I think there should be a part 2 to this conversation, maybe in season 2 of Trust Me, I'm a Decorator. I will leave you with this one little tidbit. My favorite wedding that I ever went to had really nothing to do with the wedding at all. It was that I went home for 3 days with the guitar player at the ceremony. Who came up to me at the reception, and we had not met yet, and sat next to me and said, "Would you like to get out of here?" And I said, "Yeah, okay."
Tommy, you slut.
True story.
Well, we've all slept with people at weddings, I didn't do it on my own wedding, but I'm sure plenty of them.
I think that's a bit of okay, so on that note, we need to wrap this up because this is going nowhere good.
No tips on this one.
So, in closing, tell us your summer wedding stories. You can comment on our Instagram account @TheTrustMePod, or even better, send us a voice note and we can play your voice on the show. You can do that by hitting the black button on the right-hand side of our website, thetrustmepod.com.
Congratulations to anyone getting hitched this year, and we will talk to you soon.
This podcast is distributed by the Women in Media Podcast Network. Find out more at womeninmedia.network.